Don't you think that's a lot better? I think that's a lot better. I do. Man, these cameras, look at this. I don't know what is going on today. It is just an interesting day. It's an interesting day. That's right. Good morning. Check it out. All right, so I want to start this off with 10 things. 10 things that you may or may not have thought were true that are absolutely not true. 10 things that you probably believed and maybe even have passed along. You've shared with your children. You've taught and educated on these 10 things. You've had discussions on these 10 things, and they're not real. They're not true. I'm going to give you 10 of them, and then we're going to dive into some stories and break down some myths today here on hashtag Rise and Grind. The first thing that you might have thought was true, but is absolutely not true, is that a T-Rex does not have arms. Okay? Now, this was a big deal when I told Michael Cirillo for the first time that a T-Rex actually has 4 legs. So you see, they start off early walking on the 4 legs, and over time they adjust to the position that you're used to seeing them in, which is the big, rawr, with what you call tiny little arms. But a T-Rex actually has 4 legs. Those are legs. They're not tiny little arms. They're legs. Now, see, Michael Cirillo's mind popped when I told him this for the first time, and I'm hoping that your mind doesn't pop this morning. I don't want to blow you up first thing, but that's the truth. A T-Rex has 4 legs. Crazy, right? Here's something else that you might have believed. The second thing that you maybe believed, or maybe somebody taught you. Somebody probably taught you at some point that your tongue has four completely different and distinct zones. The 4 different zones that separate the bitter, the sweet, the sour, and the salty. And here's the reality of the situation. Your tongue, every taste bud on it, has the ability to taste all of the different things. Now, some parts of the tongue are a little bit more sensitive to different flavors than other parts of the tongue, but ultimately it's spread across your entire tongue evenly. Raise your hand if you were taught the 4 different sections of your tongue, right? Not real. Here's the third thing that you may have been taught, or somebody might have told you, but it's not real. People told you that bulls hate the color red. Well, here, my friend, I hate to break your heart this morning, but bulls are colorblind. They can't even see color at all. The bullfighters use red because it looks good. It's easier for us to see. That's something that they use for their audience. The bull actually just hates the movement in his face, makes him want to attack. It's got nothing to do with the color of the sash. The fourth thing that I want to share with you that you may or may not know that is true, but somebody at some point in all the images that you've ever seen, they show Vikings wearing helmets like this. Well, the reality of the situation is Vikings didn't actually wear anything like this. This was a costume helmet that was developed in the opera in the 19th century. There was a stage hand that made a costume, put the horns on it, put it as a Viking helmet, and for some reason it just stuck. Isn't that crazy? For some reason it just stuck. And we now have images of Vikings, even our NFL Vikings have these images that came from just a costume designer. It's not even real. Isn't it nuts how that can happen? How people can believe that things that are real and they're just not. They're simply not real. The fifth thing that you may believe that's not true that I want to share with you today, and this might disappoint some of you, but this whole, does a police officer have to tell you if he or she is a cop if you ask when they are undercover? And the answer, my friends, is regretfully no. Just asking an undercover cop if he or she is a cop is not going to all of a sudden set you free from your crimes. It ain't going to happen. It's not real. That's something that was made up. They used it in a movie one time, and somehow it spread like wildfire, and people actually believed that that was truth, and it simply is not. The sixth thing that you've probably been told, and this one might throw you a little off your rocker first thing in the morning, especially at 5:30 a.m. This one might throw you a little off your rocker, but you've been told your whole life that you have 5 senses. A sense of smell, a sense of sound, a sense of sight, a sense of taste, a sense of touch. But in reality, it's actually closer to about 20. We actually have 20 different senses as human beings. You've got things like balance, pain, movement, hunger, thirst. There's roughly about 20 different senses that human beings have, not just 5. Isn't that crazy? But it's easy to teach 5, isn't it? It's easy to teach 5, and you get told that, and then you spread that, and then you share that, and then ultimately you believe that. There's a couple other ones that I'll drop on you. I said 10. There's actually going to be 8. There's a couple other that I'm going to drop on you. The 7th one is you've probably been told or heard or seen somewhere along the way that there were 3 wise men. When actually, if you open your Bible, if you look into your Bible, there is no reference whatsoever to the fact that there were only 3. There's nothing that says there was only 3. Now, it does mention 3 gifts, so most people assume because there was 3 gifts, there was only 3 wise men, but it doesn't say that. It doesn't say there was 3. Could have been 1, could have been 90, for all we know. But the story's been told so many times that we sing songs, and we believe in the 3 wise men. Another story that you may have been told that's also along biblical lines is most people believe that Satan reigns over hell. However, there's nowhere in the Bible does it say this. Nowhere in the Bible. It does say that there was a demon that was sent to earth, that he was brought down to earth. He was kicked out of heaven. But it says nothing about Satan ruling over hell. Interesting, right? As I was studying it this weekend and studying it throughout the week and just looking at all these different things, and I was thinking about the culture of our climate right now and how quick we are to assume stories that we've heard are real, to believe how quickly our mind can shift and make something that is possibly has some components of truth, we all of a sudden make it real. We make it real, right? It's so easy to believe what we've been told by people we trust. And though it's not even the fault of the people we trust, they don't mean us any harm. Sometimes stories, whether they're true or not, can actually be used for good. Sometimes stories, whether they're rooted in absolute fact or not, doesn't ultimately affect the impact that they can have on us and the impact that they can have on others. There's 3 stories I'm going to share with you today that are based in a little bit of mixture of truth and not fact and false and so on and so forth, and some believe and some don't believe, and I'm going to share these 3 stories with you so that you can start to understand this morning that what we necessarily see or what you're necessarily told isn't necessarily real but still can have value. The first story that I want to share with you is one of Paul Bunyan. You ever heard of this guy? I think it was written a couple different ways. Paul Babe and the Big Blue Ox or something like that was one, and then Paul Bunyan, right? So on and so forth. And you've heard the stories. My guess is if you're my age or roughly, you've heard the stories. But Paul Bunyan was said to be 7 foot tall. He was strong as an ox, and he worked hard every day for the lumber industry. And you see, Paul Bunyan represented strength. He represented hard work. He was a symbol for children during the Revolutionary War. But Paul Bunyan wasn't real. He wasn't a real man. So you see, back then they told stories of Paul Bunyan so that they could help motivate those that were working in the lumber yards. They told stories and folklore of this hard-working, strapping young man that was out there fighting for the lumber industry, which at the time was a huge part. This was late 1800s. So the lumber industry was a huge part of the economy of America, and they needed someone to inspire because the men were out there chopping away. They were wearing down. And so these stories of Paul Bunyan, they invigorated man. And then they were also used to help guide the children during the Revolutionary War, to help guide them in the direction that they needed them to go, which was ultimately they needed them to keep swinging that axe. Another story that you may or may not have heard of is the story of John Henry. John Henry was a burly, big, former slave that had become a steel driver working on the railroads in the late 1800s. The story was that John Henry himself went up against a machine. It was man versus machine. And that with grit and endurance, at a time when the country needed hope, they were going through slavery. There was a lot of changes that were going on, and there was a population that really needed hope. And at this time, John Henry, that's what he represented. You see, people were afraid of the machines. They were afraid they were going to take the jobs. They were afraid they're going to lose their livelihoods. They were afraid they weren't going to be able to support their families. They were afraid they weren't going to be able to make an income. They were afraid. There was fear. And so the stories of John Henry began. Now, some say John Henry was a real person. Some say he wasn't a real person, right? Some say that he was real, but he was actually 5 feet tall. He was just a little dude that was gritty and had a lot of, that had work ethic. And then others say he was this huge, right? It doesn't matter necessarily the facts of the story. Ultimately, John Henry was used to help propel people forward, to get them to move in a certain direction, so that they would continue to go out there and work, to give them hope against an industrial era that was coming upon us. Make sense? That would be a great pay-per-view fight, Josh O. I agree. John Henry, Paul Bunyan, that's what I'm talking about. There's a third one that you guys know. It's Robin Hood. Robin Hood was for the people. He was for the people. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor. And there were so many myths that popped up around Robin Hood in the medieval times. You see, all of these myths rose to help fuel a revolution. You see, there was resistance to oppression in the 14th century. This was in the late Middle Ages. And people were being oppressed all over the country. And so they needed a spark. They needed a figure. They needed someone to encourage and to motivate and to inspire them to ultimately go out and stand up against their government, to stand up against the oppression, to still have the fuel to get up and to continue to fight forward even though things seemed dire. You see, stories can be used to motivate, to inspire, to move people. And stories can also be used to create fear, to create havoc. You see, we're so susceptible. We're so susceptible to the influences of the people that we trust. The message I want to get across to you today is stories serve a purpose. They're a blend of facts and fiction told over time and ultimately multiplied to create an emotion, to stir up an emotion in you. And in today's interesting times, I want to challenge you to just use caution. Use caution. Take things with a grain of salt right now. Trust your heart and know the ultimate truth, which is that you're a child of God, right? You're a part of something bigger than self, and it's bigger than the things that are going on in the world. And ultimately, yes, the stories are being used to propel people, to move people in certain directions, and in time we'll have a better understanding of what all of that looks like. But ultimately, my friends, the real truth exists in here. The real truth is in your heart with who you are and whose you are. The real truths can be found in the Word. It can be found in your relationship with God. That's where you'll find the facts. That's where you'll know what's real and what's not. I challenge you, my friends, as Tony said at the very beginning of the intro and the announcements, right? Just stay woke. Stay woke. Use caution as we move forward through these trying times.